Welcome. My name is Jill Frigerio. I'm a NICEC fellow, and I also work at the University of Warwick. And today I am both your host and the chair of the event, and one of the speakers. And so you'll notice that at the moment I'm using the NICEC slide template. When I'm speaking later on in my substantive input, I'm going to use Warwick branded slides. We did toy around with the idea of me wearing a different hat for different parts of the afternoon, but decided that this was altogether more dignified, which isn't, to be fair, normally the path that I choose, but today I'm giving it a go. It falls to me to welcome you and give you a bit of a sense of what we're going to do this afternoon, what we've got planned, and set out a little bit of context about this issue of how we learn to be career development professionals. Let's crack on with that. NICEC Network Events, we decide on how we are going to frame each of we offer 2 network events every year. And we've been saying for a while that we felt that there was something that was very important and worth talking about at this particular moment about the way that we train people for careers, if you like, for career development practice. There's what we really want to do is explore some of the tensions that we all know about within our sector, and also some of the opportunities around the initial training and development for people in our field, and also opportunities for continuing and ongoing training and development. There's lots of sort of contextual factors that we need to be thinking about this afternoon and bearing in mind. And my remark about hats really reflects that we're all positioned within it, and we've all got different kind of things at stake, if you like, within the training and development landscape, not least our own feelings about our profession, our route into the profession, and our own work within the profession. So there's just some of the things that we're going to be exploring today. Things about different pathways and different qualification levels, the extent to which both the roles within career development and the training for them can be seen as generic or context specific. Some thoughts about the scope of career development roles, how broad in scope they might be, and indeed some of the limitations that they might experience. And finally, issues around the relative emphasis on things like working with individuals and working within systems. If you're not muted, it would be really helpful if you were able to just press mute so that we haven't got too much background noise on the recording. Thank you. I don't know if folk recognise this diagram here. This is the NICE framework about the role of the career development professional. This came out of a Europe-wide piece of work that took place. I'm thinking it was kind of around sort of from 2008 to 2016 sort of mark. I've been in the training and development of career development professionals, and that's been my main interest since 2010. And this was a project that was going on when I made that transition. Prior to that, I should say, I worked in higher education, career service delivery and management. So I used to recruit career consultants in a university career service. Anyway, the NICE project was Europe-wide, had Europe-wide scope. It was EU funded, and it was there were 2 tranches of funding, and one of the outcomes, the outputs from the second, was this idea of a framework trying to encapsulate all the different aspects of career development work. And as you can see, the NICE framework talks about some of the roles that we might, the job titles that we might hear, or the role descriptions that we might be very, very aware of around BIT careers education, career guidance and counselling, but also highlights other aspects of career development work around managing programmes and services, working within career information, and working kind of beyond the scope of a particular career service, but perhaps in interaction with policymakers and implementers as someone who is kind of working within organisational or social systems, intervening within them, advocating for careers work and for the clients that we help. So that's just that sort of framework is relevant kind of context for this discussion. We also, of course, within the UK have things like our occupational standards, things like the professional standard, the standard for the career development professional apprenticeship, which articulates knowledge, skills and behaviours at the moment for people on the apprenticeship programme. We've also got some context specific frameworks to think about, such as, so the Graduate Futures Institute, formerly AGCAS, did a piece of work around different professional pathways within HE careers work. We're going to be, I'm sure that will be in our minds at some point during the afternoon. And of course, we've got some adjacent areas of professional practice, or overlapping areas of professional practice. So, for example, within the coaching world, there are different occupational frameworks. The Association for Coaching actually articulates one around career coaching, and that's very much an overlapping area of professional practice. Similarly, within particularly within statutory services, when we think about things like the Jobs and Careers Service in England, we've got employability practitioners and some parallel training and development initiatives and capacity development programs that are going on in that space. So these are all bits of the landscape that we need to bear in mind. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but just some of the things that were very much on my mind around when we were thinking about how we wanted to frame this afternoon and what we thought would be a good flow for the event and so forth, where we know about some of the professional issues that that we face as an area of professional practice that the Career Development Institute have often talked in their strategy, and when we read the communications from CDI, they're recognising the importance of focusing on those professional issues such as status, impact, demonstrating the value of having a career development profession and the contribution that we make in terms of people moving into and through the labour market, people's life satisfaction and well-being and so forth. So professional issues extend, of course, to things like pay, and that's something that we see a lot of discussion about within the practitioner community. And we know that we've got some things to think about around attracting people to career development work and retaining people within career development work. Arguably, we do such a great job of training really highly skilled professionals who are really great at innovating and working in facilitative and developmental ways that they may then move on to other opportunities elsewhere. We know that there are issues around funding for training and complexity of routes and funding that's available for training in different contexts. And we also know that for providers, these are providers of training and indeed service providers. These are challenging times financially, and so there's not a lot of slack in the system to support the development, the provision that we have. And also the opportunities that we have around online learning. You know, the days of going to your of automatically assuming that people would go to their geographically local training provider may be over, because we've got so much potential to deliver our training in an online environment, and that might mean that aspects of the training evolve. There might be affordances, there might be limitations. So those are just my ideas of the kind of context that we're in. And this is where we're going to focus today. I'm going to hand over in a moment to Hannah from the University of Derby, who's going to talk about some research that the International Centre for Guidance Studies have done for the CDI about training and development. And then I'm going to talk briefly about some of the work that I've been involved with around developing a textbook for the profession and thinking about how we teach. Hannah and I hope that we're going to stimulate a little bit of discussion. So we're then going to move you into breakout rooms to have a little bit of discussion about what you've heard. And we'll invite you to have a comfort break at some point. Come back at 3:10 to hear from Bob Gilworth, another NICEC fellow from the University of Huddersfield, who's going to talk about context and particularly higher education careers work. And then at 3:30, David is going to change our focus into thinking about continuing professional development. We'll go back into breakout rooms for a bit more discussion, and then I'll bring you all back in for a final plenary discussion at 4:10. So hope that that's a reasonable shape for our afternoon. And I'll stop sharing now and invite Hannah to share her slides so that I can hand over to her. I hope that's okay with you, Hannah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
My screen up, and please just shout if you can't see anything, but hopefully it's there on your screens.
Yeah, we can.
So thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction, Jill. So yeah, I'm Hannah Blake. I'm a senior researcher at the International Centre for Guidance Studies at the University of Derby, and I was part of the team that conducted this project that I'm going to talk to you about today. So this is kind of a bit the outline. I'm going to provide a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of the report and the research that we did. The report is available on the CDI website if you want to go into it further and read a bit more about what we did, but hopefully I'll cover the main parts today. So why this research? So the research was commissioned by the CDI in 2024. So NICEC was asked to undertake this research in light of the acknowledgement and the complications that exist in the sector, particularly around qualifications and professionalisation. So the research sought to explore the current state of qualifications that underpin the careers profession and asked what could be done to improve these as part of a wider project of professionalising the sector. So when we were planning the research and conducting the research, there were 4 key questions that we were focusing on. So these are kind of on your screen now. So what different routes and pathways exist through which people can be trained and qualified in the career development practitioners and professionals? How are different career-related qualifications perceived by stakeholders in the sector and beyond it? What labour market advantage do they afford to those who take them? What people's experiences of studying for career-related qualifications or employing people who have been awarded these qualifications? And what barriers they face in acquiring these qualifications and skills? And what opportunities exist for continuing professional development within the sector? And for this purpose of this research, we regard a practitioner as someone who's actively engaged in career development practice, and a professional as someone who has a formal recognised qualification. So the research method. So we undertook stakeholder interviews, surveys and roundtables. So some of you here might have been involved in 1 or 2 of these things. So we started off by conducting 22 stakeholder interviews where we spoke to a wide range of representatives from across the UK, including career services, bodies, delivery organisations and career consultants. So the aim of this was to gain current attitudes towards career development qualifications, as well as identifying desired areas for desired future improvements, what people would like to see going forward. So it looked at the ideal qualifications needed to be a career development professional, attitudes towards the qualifications currently on offer, issues affecting the sector in relation to qualifications and professionalism, how people thought the sector could be further professionalised, and also the role of the CDI. And then from these stakeholder interviews, we developed a survey. So the survey was designed to explore the perspectives of a wide range of participants. So we looked at training providers, employers, practitioners, and students. So we had 644 responses in total, so a really good number. And 63% of those held a postgraduate qualification, and 87 of those were in a qualification in career development. And we had a mix of respondents working as sole practitioners, careers employed companies, further education, independent training providers, HE, and schools. So a really broad mix across the sector. 78% respondents were current practitioners, and 37% identified themselves as being careers advisors. And then finally, we undertook 4 roundtables as a final stage of the research, which each focused on a specific stakeholder group. So we had one for training providers, one for employers, one for practitioners, and one for students. So findings. So first of the findings was kind of stakeholder perception. Sector perceptions. So something that was really want to point out straight away was we heard so many different people from across the sector who really highlighted the value of their work. They saw the value of the work and really were positive about the overall purpose of the sector, stating things like it's about wanting to make a difference to people's lives and it's really rewarding. However, within this, they also noted a range of challenges, perhaps unsurprisingly connected to the attractiveness of the sector to those outside of it, and the sector having an image problem or being considered old-fashioned. And there were shared statements across the respondents saying that, if the public don't value our role and the service, how are we going to attract new people into the sector? How are we meant to be taken seriously? And often this stemmed back from other people's personal perceptions and experiences of careers when they were at school. People always also perceived that there was a limited public understanding of the qualifications held by career development professionals, which was seen to hinder the views of the sector. Participants shared that they experienced people not working in the sector, believing that anybody could do the work and qualifications aren't really necessary to do what they needed to do. As you can see on the screen, 87% of all the survey people who completed the survey strongly disagreed that there's a good public image or good public understanding of qualifications in the sector. The pay and funding. So 79% of respondents were currently in paid employment and primarily worked in the sector. So based on the Office of National Statistics UK median income for full-time employees, around 70% of respondents were earning the median income or less. And I think that's just less than 35,000. Some of the issues around cost of training qualifications were raised as part of kind of the concern around funding. Some of this was alleviated by the willingness of employers to pay for training up to degree level. However, this also meant that training qualifications focused mainly on work-based qualifications for those working in the field already. 47% of respondents did not think they were fairly paid, and there was concern over the differences in pay across the sector. For example, those working in a school versus those working HE, and with this also came obviously qualification levels as well. And employers and training providers alike also acknowledged the issue with pay and funding. It wasn't just people, practitioners and students working in the sector. They acknowledged the pay was unappealing, and therefore that affected recruitment and retention. So the issues of a poor image and lack of funding and low pay all combined meant that there was a lack of attractiveness of the sector, which therefore meant there was recruitment issues. 68% of employers said they struggled to recruit adequately qualified staff. 79% of respondents reported that they did not believe that there was enough appropriately qualified career development professionals. And whilst there was a plethora of jobs in the sector, that there were few appropriately qualified candidates. And 36% of employers said they used unqualified or underqualified staff, which they acknowledged presented numerous issues in terms of having adequate knowledge, skills, and techniques.
Excuse me, Hannah, just as you move between slides, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you, but we've got a few people in the chat saying that they're struggling to hear you and asking that you might be able to get closer to your mic, but I think you're using them. Okay, you have got a mic. I didn't realise. Okay, thank you. I'm glad I interrupted then. Apologies. I'll let you carry on if that's okay, and we'll hope that that's better.
I'll try and speak a bit louder and see if that helps.
Thank you.
So training issues was also mentioned as a problem. So across all stages of the research, participants were positive about their experiences of training and the range of different routes, but there was also frustrations about unclear and fragmented pathways into the careers professional. So there was a general consensus at 94% that minimum level of qualification should be at graduate level. However, there was also a lack of comprehension as to the differences between the different levels of qualification, what each qualification covered and what job role it enabled you to undertake, with only 36% of participants agreeing that it's unclear how to qualify as a career development professional. Added to this, 6% of respondents stated that they were working in the sector prior to gaining a qualification in career development. Students were particularly vocal about the issues they faced when trying to understand the routes, both initial qualifications and for further qualifications for those already working in the sector, stating things such as, I'm not really sure I fully understand the differences between level 6 and level 7. And training providers also stated that they thought that the landscape was really confusing and caused a variety of issues as a result of that, with qualifications, too many qualifications that varied, and a variety of what qualifies for practice. And 70% of overall respondents to the survey thought that the sector would benefit from streamlining of the qualification route. So promotion and progression was also within the sector was described as difficult and unclear. Students and training providers suggested the need to increase the support for newly qualified practitioners in the form of mentoring or a year's probationary period. Respondents said they'd like to see more support to undertake CPD. 65% cited that they had a lack of time to undertake CPD opportunities, with finances obviously also being a big limitation for this. And they'd like to see more specialisms within CPD, such as SEND, as a modular approach rather than whole standalone qualifications. And there was particularly discussion around the stagnation in the sector and the lack of progression pathways, which was considered to discourage practitioners from pursuing further qualifications, and often was seen to lead to people departing from the sector, particularly in school-based roles where they didn't see a progression route in place. So, what needs to happen next? Taking on board the findings, we came up with a selection of recommendations, which we then presented to the CDI in the final report. So, firstly, renew the sector's commitment to professionalisation. So, the importance of qualifications and a campaign to improve the image of the sector. So since this research has been done, the CDI has launched its first long-term campaign to raise the profile of the profession. I'm sure you're very much aware of this. So that things are slowly beginning to be noticed, to be acknowledged, and to move in the right direction for change. Pay and funding, obviously this is a difficult one. We want to improve pay and improve the conditions, but that we need influential organisations within the sector, such as the CDI, to advocate for increased government investment with an emphasis on sustainable funding. There's a need for government funding to support new people to acquire qualifications, be it in the form of bursaries, employee support, training provided with direct funding. Qualification reform. So the sector currently offers a really wide range of qualifications. As we've already said, they were poorly understood. People didn't know who are new into the sector didn't understand which qualifications they should be going into or what they provided, one compared to another. So the suggestion was to clarify and simplify the range of qualifications, strengthen the work-based and classroom-based routes into the profession, and clarify the differences between the different level of qualifications and what you get through those different qualifications, what they enabled you to do within the sector and who they enable you to work with. And post-qualification. So this is both in terms of support and progression. So we suggested that the CDI should invest in work with the career development professionals and employers to codify what the post-qualification period. So what does it look like? What support is needed for career development professionals, and what after they qualify, and what should they expect to receive in terms of support and guidance in their newly qualified status. The CPD opportunities should be strengthened, and there should be wider opportunities available. And finally, the effort needs to be made to offer stronger pathways for professionals and development within the field to progress their careers. That's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the research and what we found. Obviously, we recognise that some of these recommendations aren't quick fixes and rely on many different contributors to come and work together to tackle these issues. And we know that it might be 5-10 years down the line that all these different issues are tackled. But acknowledging and recognising what people have said and starting to make a step forward towards those changes is a good step in our view. So yes, thank you very much. And that's me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm sure we all want to extend our thanks to Hannah, and Hannah's sticking around for the discussion later on, so it will be good to hear responses to that piece of research that's been done by our colleagues at Derby. So now it's hat change time, and I'm going to share my screen and talk to you a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing in this space. you can just bear with my clumsy use of tech. Right, can everybody see my slide there? Someone give me a wave. Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah. So, as I said earlier, I'm Jill Frigerio from the University of Warwick. We're one of the university-based providers of career development training. We've got a range of different courses, and we also one that's focused on people working in higher education, which is a partnership with the Graduate Futures Institute. Generic one, a coaching qualification as well, which actually does attract quite a lot of careers folk looking at CPD. And also an apprenticeship, which is currently at level 7, although we won't be able to offer that in the long term, and we'll be looking to represent that at level 6 once the assessment framework is available from Skills England. We were also one of the providers of careers leaders training that was funded by the Careers and Enterprise Company, but well, long story. Anyway, today I'm here to talk to you about the Career Development Handbook, which is a textbook that I co-authored with colleagues Tristram Hooley, also NICEC Fellow, and of Hannah's Parish of the International Centre for Guidance Studies, and Rosie Alexander, also a NICEC Fellow, who at the time that we put the book together was working at the University of West of Scotland, one of the Scotland-based training providers. She's now working in Denmark. So we last week we published the book about 18 months ago, and we've done a number of different activities, sort of talking about the book and working with the book. One of which was just last week in Norway. So some of this material is I'm kind of repurposing from what we did in Norway last week. But the particular focus that I want to take today is to tell you a little bit about some of the background research that we did for the book. So when we were thinking about the focus that we wanted to take for a textbook, we decided to do a little bit of kind of research with other people who were providing training in this space, and see what messages we were getting back from folk about the priority issues for a book, the emerging areas that they'd like to see covered in a book. We had our own ideas about how to frame a textbook, and how to make it comprehensive, and how to provide what we felt was needed, kind of one kind of broad text that could be offered to our students, and maybe students in other courses as well. But we wanted to kind of sense check that with our colleagues. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Not so much the book, I will say a bit about the book, but about this research that we did prior to writing the book, which we are about to publish literally next month as an article in the NICEC Journal. So I'm going to kind of rattle through some of this today, but within a few short weeks you'll be able to pore over it in more detail. I also want to say a few words at the end about my own kind of interest that's been developing alongside writing this book. That's not just about what we teach and the content of courses or the content of textbook, but how we teach. I lead a team. We're all involved in, we're all teachers. We're all wanting to develop our courses, and so thinking about how we teach and what's distinctive about that has been something that I've been developing an interest in. So we felt that our field lacked one comprehensive textbook for training programmes, and in thinking about what we wanted to put into such a textbook, what would make a good proposal to our publisher, Trotman, which was the first book in the Trotman CDI series, we thought about, as I talked about earlier, the frameworks like the NICE framework, the occupational standards, the apprenticeship standard. We also thought about some of the contemporary issues that are making new demands on career professionals, the things that we were hearing about from our students that were in already in practice. We particularly were thinking about that kind of balance between functional skills and critical thinking. We were thinking about contexts and what's generic about career development work. And we were thinking very much about the emphasis on working with individuals. So, you know, there's a number of books around that do a really good job of focusing on the way that we work with individuals in one-to-one work, whatever label we might put on that. But we were also thinking about working groups and working systemically, working across organisations of all types, working with other professions, and kind of intersections with policy landscape and so forth. We're also recognising that there was a lot of complexity around in very constrained practice contexts. And we were thinking about what our students need, but as I said, we consulted with other course providers as well. So in the article that you'll be able to read before too long, we did some literature scoping, looked at prior research, and I just want to highlight these couple of studies that my references are at the end. One was a study done in the Nordic countries where, as you might be aware, there's pretty well developed career development work now, and a series of qualifying courses. And there has been some work that was done there looking at the way that the framework was being, NICE framework was being used in educational programs. That research noted that for most programs, there was a stronger emphasis on working with individuals and less of an emphasis on working at organisational and societal levels. Apologies for that missing space in the slide there. In another piece of work that came hard after that one, that looked internationally at the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, as well as Norway, there were findings around courses mapping onto the NICE framework, but some gaps around the development of leadership and management competencies, and that gave us a bit of a pause for thought about the book. We were also very aware of some of those issues that we've talked about already today about the public policy landscape, the funding and regulation that was in place around career development work, some of the contexts. Some would look for more academic training, some quite significant lack of regulation within training, and the issues around the profession being weakly professionalised. So we did a reasonably simple survey that went through Warwick Ethical Approval, was hosted on Qualtrics, and circulated as an online survey via our networks. And we asked people who were filling in the programme, and we had multiple people from different providers sometimes filling in the survey, talking about the nature and the level of the courses that they taught. We asked people about their course content, what they were currently focusing on and what they would like to focus on. Looking at those categories that you can see there: professional issues, contextual issues, career theory, counselling, education, information and resources, organisations and systems. We asked people what they thought their top 3 priorities were, and we asked people to help us to identify emerging areas that required more coverage. We got 21 responses, and the majority of which were from the UK, but not all. And a fairly even split of different levels. So we've talked about levels. In England, in my kind of world, I would think about master's level as level 7, bachelor's level being level 6, and below bachelor's being lower than 6. Of course, that language and those frameworks might be different in your context. The majority of people telling us about their programs were talking about part-time delivery, but not all. And there was some diversity of what came through in the data about the pedagogical approaches and features that were making up people's courses, but largely there was evidence of people working in reasonably small groups and using highly participatory and experiential approaches, placement, authentic assessment, practice-based types of provision. So here I'm just summarising for you the consensus that we found within those 7 areas about priority areas. So this is what people were telling us they wanted their programme. They felt it was really important that their programmes were covering. I'll just let you have a look at that. Perhaps no surprises there. But moving on, we also asked some questions about the emerging areas that people would like to see us covering or would like to be able to incorporate within their courses. And here's just some examples of the sorts of things that were mentioned. We could have a go at clustering those, I guess, perhaps. But this is kind of reporting on the sorts of themes that were coming across in the data. So we've got some themes around technology. We've got some themes around the changes in the labour market. We've got some themes around justice and taking a global perspective. Some themes around the way that we work with our clients, and some different contexts as well. So what did we do? Well, this is how we put the book together. We're trying to cover a very broad landscape in this book, so we're not going into a lot of depth, but we have got a lot of resources in there that we're recommending for sort of further reading and so forth. So we lay out the kind of the nature of careers work and cover it. Has a lot of introductory material about the profession. We also cover study skills. We felt that for our students there was some need for the coverage of study skills, and we looked at the role of the career development profession and the context in which we work. We've got a really bumper chapter about career theory, and then go into other kind of areas of professional competence before we also try kind of go lean into this area that we were concerned about around kind of working organisationally and systemically, and also a chapter on leading and managing within career development, trying to kind of present that as something that's of concern to everybody and not just those who seek to kind of formally enter a leadership position, but something that we all as practitioners need to think about. Going back to the survey data, this is just a summary of what we discuss in the article. There was some variation, but largely agreement about key features. Very strong agreement on one-to-one guidance skills and the importance of that within programs. But less of a feature was coverage of policy and labour market structures that influence the way that we're working. We also found that for example, there's lots of the English responses and the existence of the careers leader role in England influenced some of the findings. So, for example, we had people saying, oh, our careers leader training covers leadership and working systemically. Our guidance practitioner training does not. So we thought that was an interesting thing to look at. So the way that we've put the book together, I just want to highlight that each chapter includes further resources, but we've also hoped that we've developed something that, as well as being useful to read on its own, can be used in courses. So, for example, we've got reflection activities, we've got case studies. So this is a case study of a kind of that could be used about ethical dilemmas in practice. And what we're really trying to get across is the kind of multiple forms of knowledge that underpins careers work, the importance of being informed and reflective, as we're talking about today, the importance to think about our own careers and our own continuing professional development, and the scope of the role and the potential that we have to be influential in the career development role. So that's the book, but as I said earlier, and I haven't got very long, I'll have to speed up, sorry. I have also been thinking quite a bit about the way that we teach career development, and don't know if folk are familiar with the idea of signature pedagogies, which is something that we've been talking about at Warwick quite a lot. This is a term that was coined by Schulman, who is an American scholar of higher education, and he talked about the unique different professions having a unique way of teaching and learning that's part of how kind of enculturation within a profession takes place. So we might think about, for example, the ward round in medical education, or we might think about mooting and debating as a key mode of delivery within legal education, for example. And what Schulman's saying is the way that those pedagogies are implemented forms in some way and communicates something about the nature of that profession. So it's not just about having the knowledge, but also about the dispositions and cultures. He talks about developing habits of hand, mind, and heart. Habits of the heart being a phrase that's very much associated with kind of the American self-understanding of the individual. So those are signature pedagogies. Schulman talks about different surface signature pedagogy, a deep signature pedagogy, and the implicit ones as well. And so here's some examples of the ways in which signature pedagogies might be turning up within career development work. So we might talk about the ways that we teach, the underpinning epistemologies that we have within our programs, and the beliefs and values that are communicated. And this is me sort of starting to think about what those might be within our area. So I'm interested in exploring signature pedagogies for career development work because I see it as an important way of understanding the socializing and the formation of professional identity for career development professionals. I don't think signature pedagogies are necessarily unproblematic. It could be that we have some blind spots around our signature pedagogies, and there might be ways that we want to explicitly develop them in order to address challenges for our profession. But I think if we go into some depth about this, it will give us greater insights into our professional training. And I think if we looked at the career development signature pedagogies alongside and compared with other professional areas, it might allow us, and this would be particularly relevant for those of us working in universities that are engaged in different forms of professional development for other areas of work, it might enable us to develop some connections there. So we're going to go into breakout rooms shortly, and here's my questions for you about how we for the first part of what I said, how we extend the focus on organisations and systems in career development practitioner training. The second part of what I've said, what are the signature pedagogies in, I should be just one career there, development practitioner training. What is the potential for exploring this further? So I'm, as I said earlier, I'm going to set up some breakout rooms now and invite you into those rooms to explore those questions before we come back at 3:10 to hear from Bob. Okay, folk are back, so I'll say over to you, Bob, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Jill. Hello, everybody. I'm Bob, one of the NICEC fellows. Right now, I work in, I'm an academic in the School of Education at the University of Huddersfield, specifically in the career development and employability subject area, and therefore connected with the Masters and PG Dip in career development and employability. That's what I do now and have been doing for the last 5 years or so on a part-time basis. But prior to that, the vast majority of my career has been spent in leadership roles in higher education career services, and that will probably come across as a perspective in the next 15 minutes or so. A bit of that introduction tells you one thing, which is that I've been around for a long time, and I think I'm reasonably confident that, like me, there will be people on this call who can remember Bananarama and the Fun Boy 3. Yeah? Absolutely. Okay, and even if, and I hope you all do, but even if you don't, those of you that do will certainly remember that they had a great big hit with a song called It Ain't What You Do, It's the Way That You Do It. It probably wouldn't have been such a chart buster if it had been called It Is What You Do and the context in which you do it. But that's our version. As Bananarama and the Fun Boy 3 sang, that's what gets results. And that's the way we see it. So in terms of professional education, then of course skills matter, of course theory matters. But so do context, strategy, and policy. And I always like to be in line with Jill Frigerio, but especially today, because in terms of what Jill was saying earlier, I think we are talking particularly about being actors in organisations and systems. So here's a quick look at the outline of our particular programme. It's a distance learning programme, by the way, to Jill's earlier point about online learning. And the components there in the core modules, don't worry about the dates, it's a carousel system. The components are kind of what you'd expect. So effective careers conversations, the one-to-one guidance, you'd expect to see that. Facilitating careers working groups, group work, careers education, you'd expect to see that. Theories, of course. Understanding the labour market, of course. Organisation, culture and professional practice is something of a context module in the sense that it's about working in different settings. It's about ethical practice. Naturally enough, the research components are done by the MA students, but not by the PG Dip students. But the bits that I wanted to draw your attention to really were the optional modules that were listed previously, because all students do one of these. And this is the choice. So employer engagement, entrepreneurship and business support, leadership and management in career education and higher education in context. And the employer engagement and business support one and the higher education in context one come from an HE perspective. The leadership and management in careers education one comes from essentially a schools and college perspective. Now, I'm going to focus on HE because it's the stuff that I know about. But I know that my colleague Sue Edwards is on the call. So when it comes to discussion later on, if people want to ask about or talk about this stuff in that schools and colleges context, then I imagine Sue will be able to sort of say something about that. So in the HE context modules, one of the questions we put to our students is, why did we, and I say we because I was one of the people that did this, why did we, by and large, change the job title from careers advisor to careers consultant? Why did we do that? And really underpinning all of that is another question, which is, to whom are they consultants? And of course, there are multiple stakeholders to whom they're consultants, but principally, the job on the ground, they are consultants to academic departments, to schools and faculties. And this is in some ways a very visible manifestation of a direction of travel over the last quarter of a century or so, where career services have moved, not universally, but very often, from the periphery to the core, and from being a central provider of purely opt-in services to individual students to faculty-facing or faculty-embedded expert consultants / business partners. That's been the shift over the last 25 to 30 years. And in terms of helping people to understand that and their place in it, then we think that helping people to know about how we got to here is key to understanding that context and thereby operating more effectively. Because generally speaking, my own experience and that of many colleagues is that if careers professionals understand why things are the way they are, they will operate more effectively in that context. So in terms of those historical perspectives and direction of travel, another big question that we ask our students on the HE modules, in fact, it's the first question we ask the students on the HE modules, is this: what are universities for? And we get into that whole debate about public good to private good, a benefit to society as a whole, a return on an investment to an individual, and so on. If you're familiar with the work of Simon Marginson, then some of his work does a fair bit of heavy lifting in this part of the programme. I'm looking at that history from John Henry Newman and the idea of the university as a community of scholars, through to the Deering Report in the 1990s, which was first really introducing the idea of employability, through to the Brown Review, students at the heart of the system, that brought in the background to the tripling of tuition fees in 2012, right through to the creation of the Office for Students and the move to consumer regulation. And a good example of that, or certainly it is to me because I've lived through it, was the transition from the FDS to Delhi to graduate outcomes. So originally, the first destination survey was collection of data on where graduates had gone to, which was instigated by careers professionals for careers guidance purposes. That's why it was done. And then it was taken on by government agencies and became the Destination of Leaders from Higher Education survey, which then started to feed league tables, and ultimately in 2018 became what we now know as the Graduate Outcomes Survey. So it's gone from something that was done for guidance purposes to something that is now a really quite significant element of sector regulation, consumer regulation by the Office for Students. And one thing that kind of disappeared, that not many people talk about, but maybe that's because not many people remember it, but was the end of mutual aid. So when I first joined University Career Services in the kind of early 90s, and through to about the early 2000s, there was a national scheme called Mutual Aid, where we in University Career Services, through a sort of fairly loose agreement, would see graduates from other universities who happened to live in our locale and wanted to come and use our service. That disappeared in the early 2000s with very little fanfare. It just went. And I think that was a signal, not just about resourcing, but about the idea of marrying the idea of the provision of career support to positional competition. And so that, I think, was an indicator, quite an important indicator of that direction of travel. Now, I think we always have to acknowledge when we talk about policy, as we do in these modules, that policy is out there, and policy is kind of standardized, at least at the level of, say, home nations. Policy is out there, but when you work within an organization system, i.e. a higher education institution, it's always translated through institutional identity and strategy. And that explains why policy X, in terms of resources and support and structure for careers work, will look different in University A than it does in University B. The thing that is a unifying factor is the idea that higher education career services are not services to the general public. They're departments of their universities, and everything they do flows from that basic fact. You know, there's no statutory requirement that a university has a career service at all, but they choose to have one. So you might imagine that if they have a part in its very existence, then you know the institutional context is bound to influence the way in which it operates and the work of the people within it. So the professionals that we are trying to support here, and they may be people who are new to the profession or people who are taking the program part-time, currently working in the sector, they're often at the interface of these multiple connected strategies: learning and teaching, the student experience, access and participation, knowledge exchange, the idea of place and the civic agenda, the international, particularly the international student agenda, and research environment in terms of career support for early career researchers. And it's also important, I think, for us to be very clear that modern higher education career services are multi-role, multitask organisations. So certainly in large career services in the UK, careers consultants, advisors, people with that job title are frequently the largest single group of staff, but they're rarely an overall majority of the staff in the service. Colleagues are in roles linked mostly to, say, the knowledge exchange and civic agendas. For example, those people who are in roles that are funded by the Higher Education Innovation Fund are likely to be in other roles. And as Jill reflected earlier, the AGCAS, now Graduate Futures Institute, structure and indeed its professional pathways and standards reflect that. And in our case, the employer engagement enterprise and business support model is also an attempt to reflect that. So we think and we try to deal with the idea that strategy matters to the practitioner on the ground because they're impacted by it, or they're constrained by it, or they're enabled by it. And at best, they're active, expert participants in shaping it. And one of the things that I think we have to acknowledge here is that we do find that something we're trying to do here is to encourage people who are very often reticent to see themselves as experts as being that. If any of you have read Nalini Thamba's work on professional identity, that's very neatly summed up in that work. And part of that expert role is being on top of the data, the evidence base. Being on top of the data and being able to explain it to non-specialists is now, and has been for a good few years now, as David certainly knows, is a key element of that expert role. And not just about knowing what the data is, but being able to make that journey from data to useful information to actionable insight, from the what to the so what to the now what. And so the essence of all of this is the role of being an expert partner in a shared endeavour. Within that organisational system, the shared endeavour of student careers and employability, on being an expert partner in that. So we think that the context modules, whilst it's important to help people to understand the context in and of itself, that the context modules help to situate the practical skills, the knowledge, the data, and the theory that is coming from other parts of the program. Ultimately, I think the expert partner role and fulfilling that role is now a fundamental element of the required skill set, not least because it's the primary route to ensuring that the career development expertise and skills that those people have is deployed to the greatest effect. And so the way that we try to approach that in terms of the way we look at content, the way we encourage people to critically engage with this stuff, and how we try to assess is based on a model of why, what, how, and who, and how do we know? So why is this thing happening? What is it that is being conceived of or delivered? How is it being delivered and who's involved? And how do we know, A, that it's a good idea in the first place, and B, that we know that it works? What's the evidence base? And this isn't something, obviously, that we've just kind of thought would be a good idea. It comes partly from our own experience, because there's decades of HE career service leadership experience in our team as it happens. It's also because we're reflecting the structures and capability needs of our HE stakeholders. So when we talk to our quite significant network of partners and supporters, the people who recruit our graduates, send us their students, provide placements, facilitate student projects, this is the message we're getting from them. It's also been a task of mine recently has been to establish our International Centre for Career Development. I'm not going to go into that at any length, but one of the first jobs was to set up an advisory group. The advisory group is kind of small and perfectly formed in the sense that it's made up of Stephen Isherwood, the Chief Executive of the Institute of Student Employers, 2 NICEC Fellows, Charlie Ball and Nalini Thambar. And essentially, those people too are giving us that message. So we have that consistent message that the sector needs careers and employability. And by the sector, I'm talking higher education here. The sector needs careers and employability professionals who understand the context. And if they understand the context, they'll deploy their skills to greater effect. So there's a few references that you might want to have a look at to give you some more background on this stuff. So the first chapter there in the history book edited by Michelle Stewart is a kind of a encapsulation of that journey, of that direction of travel over the last 25 years or so. If you want to unpack that a bit more, then each of the people that have contributed to that chapter have individual chapters in the Graduate Careers in Context book that was edited by Kieran Burke and Fiona Christie and published in 2019. So, for example, mine is about organizational responses to the employability agenda. Nalini's is about contested boundaries of expertise, and David's is about big data and the kind of mindset that people need, practitioners need in that new context. I'd also recommend Rachel Hewitt's HEPI paper called Getting On, Graduate Employment and Its Impact on UK Higher Education. And then finally, the final resource there is Bananarama and the Fun Boy 3 on top of the pops. So that's me done. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to joining in the discussion as we move along, and of course to David's input.
Thank you, Bob. Perfectly timed. That was great. And we'll move without further ado to David's input and then have a further round of breakout rooms before we come back for a plenary discussion. There's lots of interesting stuff going on in the chat, but I will try not to be distracted by that, and we can all listen to David. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So as the kind of round-up person, I'm going to kind of move on a little bit and look at kind of professional growth, CPD, reflective practice, and AI. So kind of a mix of things. And this is very much a kind of a thought piece or an opinion piece or possibly kind of reflective piece. My aim is really to stimulate some thoughts and discussion around what we need to do to think about ongoing professional development and confidence. And so I'm going to begin with a little bit of the bio about me so that you know where these opinions and thoughts and questions are coming from. And then I've got 3 questions that I want to kind of put to you to think about during my talk, but also maybe to take them into the discussions afterwards as well. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of challenges of CPD, the importance and also the difficulties about reflective practice, and then looking at potentially what impact AI has on that and how we might deal with that. So that's kind of what I'm going to cover. So a little bit about me as Bob. My background is a higher education careers professional. I've also been a manager, so like Jill, I've recruited careers professionals. Also doing consultants, or consulted on a range of things, both kind of recruitment practices, but also setting up peer review and ongoing CPD support in different organisations. One of the things I've done a lot of is training. One of the big things I trained on was something called Guidance Skills Advanced, which is an ADCAS course. One of the things I used to say about that is there's no such thing as advanced guidance skills. They're just the same skills you learn when you first learn them. What makes it different is how you think about how you use them. So really, I should call this course Advanced Reflective Practice, but if I did, nobody would sign up. And so I've taught that for several years, and that's where I learned a lot about reflective practice and what makes it work and what makes it difficult. I've also had a long-term interest in career theory, and so I wrote for a long time a blog called Careers in Theory, where I tried to kind of think about how you apply kind of theory and research to practice in different ways. And that may be one of the things that got me kind of accepted as a NICEC fellow, is kind of pushing in that direction. I also spent 6 years as ADCAS Learning Director, now Graduate Futures Institute. And again, one of the things that I did in my role as a manager was to join the Trailblazer group for developing the Career Development Professionals Apprenticeship Standard Framework, which Michelle Stewart did pretty much most of the heavy lifting on that, but I chipped in with a few annoying comments. But as ADCAS Learning Director, one of the things I did was actually persuade Warwick, where Jill is based, to actually be a provider for that apprenticeship education, because I felt very strongly that was a way of helping to sustain qualifications for career development professionals. I am now technically semi-retired. I got made redundant from my job previously, but I'm now working part-time as a freelance careers consultant working with Cambridge University. Also, I'm teaching on a module on strategic employability with higher education, although that's coming to an end very soon. Also do visiting lecture on career theories, working at City with Julia. So I do a range of different things from different perspectives, and that's probably where I'm coming from. A couple of things for sort of reading is there's an article I wrote a long time ago for NICEC Journal about narrative techniques and reflective practice, which still remains one of my favorite things that I have ever written. So it's my personal favorite. I still think it's probably the best thing I've done in terms of just the way it hangs together. But you can judge for yourself if you want to. But recently, last year on LinkedIn, I did a kind of follow-up to that, looking at, okay, how would that article be rewritten if taking into account AI developments, and how might it be different? How could we approach reflective practice differently, incorporating AI to help us to do that, with a big warning about personal data and things like that. And I've had a very long-term interest in reflective practice, and one of the things I've developed is an online resource called Hall of Mirrors, which looks at kind of exploring what reflective practice is, how it works, what reflection is, but also collecting together whatever resources I can steal from wherever I go of tools and techniques that would help with reflective practice. I also had another blog which I started a while back, which is really to help me think myself about what impact does AI have on thinking and learning. And so there's a bunch of things there where I kind of just wander off in random directions to think about AI and impact. So those are things that, again, if they're of interest to you, you may want to look at. So the 3 questions that I would like to kind of throw to you to think about, and quite frankly, if instead of listening to me for the rest of the session, you just want to think about these and maybe drop some things in the chat, I'm perfectly fine with that. Actually, probably be more useful for your time to do that maybe. So the first one is, what experience for you had the biggest impact on your own professional development and confidence? So what is the thing that had the biggest impact on your professional confidence in your entire development history? Next question is, how do you incorporate reflection into your own professional development now? How do you do that? what are the things that you do to reflect within your practice? And finally, what do you think makes reflection difficult, both for you and maybe for others that maybe you're helping to try and develop? So those are a couple of things there, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and come back to that a little bit later on if we get time just to pick up on some of those things, but do sort of throw things in as we go along. So what's the challenges of CPD? Well, we've already heard quite a lot about them, so I'm not going to go on too much about it. But obviously, money is tight, budgets are tight, both for those who are buying training and those who are providing it. And also time is increasingly tight for practitioners in terms of actually going on training and doing things like that. And now the standard solution to that would be to kind of do training in bulk and to standardize it as much as you can, because then you can have sort of economies of scale within training. But the trouble with that is within the career development world, things are changing all the time, and they're changing really rapidly, especially with technology, with changing policies and things like that. So it's almost like you're trying to hit a moving target in terms of standardization. And again, we were talking about this in the fellows meeting previously about the fact that, you know, certain standards, the Australian standards have just been published, and it contains a lot about AI. But a lot of that is very likely to be very quickly out of date because it's moving on so quickly anyway. And so it's almost impossible now to write a standard that isn't out of date by the time you publish it. The other thing is just the profession itself. It's already a diverse profession in terms of the different contexts that we've kind of heard about there, higher education schools, in companies, private client work, all those kinds of different things, different contexts, different scenarios, different challenges. But increasingly, as Bob pointed out, you know, there's increasingly diversity in roles that are within the career development professional fold. So with, you know, employer engagement, student engagement, teaching and learning, all those kinds of things are increasingly embedded within that. So how do you develop a standard which incorporates all of those things? So that's one of the challenges, is how do you do that? How do you have the standards? How do you have teaching that actually is able to address that problem? Now, one of my answers I would propose is thinking about how you develop reflective practitioners. Now, it's a challenge that we try to think about, but I'm not sure that we think about it as explicitly as we should. When I was recruiting careers consultants, we were recruiting people who weren't qualified and we were giving them qualifications. And so one of the things I did with the recruitment process was to focus on actually trying to assess people's ability to reflect. And so we incorporated activities within that. And part of that was really just hard-nosed kind of return on investment. Because, you know, I had seen that those who were good at reflecting, if you gave them training, you got double the value of that training because they would teach themselves afterwards and carry on the learning as part of that. They would then keep improving because each experience they had was a learning experience that would then build on and question and think about as they go along, which then made them more adaptable. So when you had to change things, when systems changed, when the job role changed, when the challenges changed, they would be constantly thinking about, oh, how do I apply what I've already learned to what this new challenge is? How do I learn something else myself? So they tend to be more self-directed and they tend to personalize their own learning. So you could take something general and somebody who's good at reflection would tend to then go, okay, well, how does that apply in this setting? And how does that apply in this setting? And so I would be thinking about how would you be on the lookout for people who would naturally gear towards reflective practice. And so we included some assessments within there to kind of try and unpick that as part of it. So I guess that's one of my arguments, is that one of the focuses, maybe one of the signature pedagogies that we maybe should have within career development professional, both initial training and continuing professional development, is this idea of developing reflective practitioners, but equipping people to be that. So then leads on to the question is, okay, well, if that's the case, if that's what we're aiming for, why is it hard? Because one of the things that I've found in trying to kind of teach reflectively over the years is it's hard to get people to do it unless they have a natural propensity to do it in the first place. And so one of the things that I often come across in kind of lots of different kind of education settings is that the ability to do reflective practice is assumed. It's not taught. So people are just told to reflect on this or do some engage in critical reflection. But very, very rarely at any point in your education are you taught how to reflect on yourself effectively and engage in critical reflection. I guess the other thing is in terms of when you do it, it can be hard work And it tends to pay off more in where there are repeated activities. So if you do something and then you're going to do that same thing again soon, reflective practice actually pays off more quickly in those kind of contexts. Whereas if you've got kind of longer term projects which you might repeat less frequently, or even things which are fairly unique from project to project, it's hard then to take the kind of reflection and learning from one and apply it to another. So the payoff is less. It does require time and space, and that's still an issue. In terms of how you do it, but there are things that can do that. And again, I noticed something in the comments around this idea of ask time to listen to it and ask for reflection from others and feedback and things like that. And that can obviously be really challenging to actually carve out the space for actually engaging with other people in terms of peer learning and things like that. And then there's a couple of other fundamental things, which is around kind of our own natures. And one is to do with kind of the biases that we have. Generally speaking, the more that we develop as professionals, the more we build our own internal models of our professional, how the professional world works. And the more we then tend to fall prey to things like confirmation bias, this idea of, okay, I'm going to look for reasons to justify the way I think about things rather than reasons to challenge the way I think about things. And there's also things like hindsight bias in terms of, okay, I'm going to re-edit my memories so that I knew about this all along, rather than thinking, hang on a minute, I didn't know about this, I should really think about what I don't know in the future. And I guess the other thing which gets increasingly difficult as you develop as a professional is that actually really deep critical reflection can be threatening, because you have to acknowledge that you've got things wrong, that you maybe think, not just in terms of the outcomes, but also the way you're approaching it, the way you're thinking about it, the assumptions that you're making, the values and ideals that you're approaching it with can all be challenged by deep reflective thinking. And that can be an identity threat. One of the things that I used to do was do a kind of one-day management introduction course. Yes, exactly. We do re-edit our memories, which was for doctors, and this was for consultants. And so it's interesting this idea was introducing them to management skills at a kind of very senior stage in their career. And one of the things I got them to do was to try and recall the last time they had felt like they didn't have a clue what they were doing. Going back to their early days of medical training, and to try and kind of remember that and re-immerse themselves in that feeling and how it was, and how that kind of spurred their learning as a medical practitioner. And then I said, well, that's what it's going to be like for you as you learn to become a manager, because everybody gets it wrong to begin with. So if you're new into management leadership roles, you're going to get it wrong. But if you're used to getting it right as an experienced professional, then you're going to find that really, really hard to engage with and to cope with emotionally. And so that's one of the things I started to talk about in terms of how you learn how to be an effective leader and manager when you've already been effective as something else. And so I guess that's one of the key challenges when it comes to CPD and ongoing professional development, is actually deeper learning is more challenging and often more threatening when you're already feeling like you know what you're doing. And so there's this very strong emotional element to reflective practice, which I don't think is often acknowledged as much as maybe it should be. And so it's this idea of that balance between affirmation and challenge when it comes to teaching and learning reflective practice is a very difficult one to judge, and it changes as you go through your professional career. So one other question I think about is, okay, now we're in the age of AI, does AI make reflection harder or easier? And so I thought, I did some thinking about this a while ago on the Winter Thinking blog about, okay, what are the different ways in which you could use AI, and it's possible to use AI. And at the very kind of highest level, you can use AI as a kind of thinking partner to kind of question and challenge and reflect on your own thinking, as a kind of provocateur, as a critical friend. You can do it you can do it in terms of kind of brainstorming and idea generation, and it's like you can use it that way. But quite a lot of people, when they approach AI, mainly because it's sold that way quite often, is they tend to use it at that lower level. AI is something to do things for you, so that you don't have to do them yourself. And so basically you give it an instruction and it does the work for you. And that is the kind of the fear that of academics have around assessment, but it's also a real threat in terms of kind of becoming a crutch for people and diminishing our abilities as thinkers. And so
AI can be all of those things. It can be a really amazing aid, but it can also be a threat, which actually reduces our ability to engage in the process of reflective practice. And so, again, one of the things I did on the blog is to start to use this framework to kind of develop tools to help people think about how they progress through different stages of competence with AI so that they're more equipped to think at the higher levels, or how you even start at the high level and then work down. Now, and then I thought, okay, what is it that makes it more likely for people to use it as a crutch? Now, don't worry, you don't have to look at this diagram. This is just an evidence of my thinking, my thought processes in visual form. But the conclusion he came to is, okay, you're more likely to use AI as a shortcut if you don't really understand the task that you've been given in terms of the cognitive task, or if you're not really confident that you're going to do it well. Also, if you don't necessarily see the value in the outcome, you don't see the benefit of doing it in terms of the impact that it has on you, or you don't necessarily value the process for the process in itself. And so if all of those things are true, then it's much more likely that with reflective practice, that is often the case. And therefore, you're likely to kind of use AI as a prop for reflective practice rather than a tool to help you do it better. And so part of it, I would say, is a couple of thoughts that kind of stem from this. Is that it's an interesting question is how often is reflective practice a core competency in professional standards frameworks? So I looked at the most recently published Australian one. It's not there. It's mentioned in various other things related to kind of professional ethics and things like that as a core competency, not even as a specialist competency. It's not there. Interestingly, when we developed the apprenticeship framework, under the first skill, S1, that's mentioned in the framework, is reflecting on practice. Now, that may or may not have been to do with my involvement in the process of developing that. But again, it may be worth looking at some of the kind of professional standards that we have, and also the kind of the learning outcomes that we have on our qualification courses and things like that, and say, to what extent is reflective practice a core thing? Because this is a fundamental thing that people will need throughout their professional lives. As Michelle has just kind of pointed out there, it's a lifelong practice. And if you don't learn how to do it from the beginning, it's very unlikely that you'll carry on doing it throughout your career. And also explicitly teaching people how to do it and focusing on actual practical techniques and tools rather than saying, okay, just reflect on this. Are there different tools that you can use which suit different people's approaches to reflection? And so thinking about that, how your brain works and how that ties into that. But also focusing on the kind of emotional preparation for reflection. The fact that increasingly as time goes on, the more that you reflect, and if you want to do it well, it will challenge some fundamental things about how you think about your role and what you do and your identity. And actually that can be quite distressing. One of the things that we used to do on the Guidance Skills Advanced course was actually set this up and say, look, we want you to fail. And if you don't at some point on this course experience the feeling like you have failed miserably, then you are not trying hard enough and we will be disappointed in you. And so one of the things we then encourage people to talk about their failures, and we would then celebrate their failures as a way of learning and reflecting. But we wanted to build that kind of expectation in as part of that sort of learning. And I had one time when I was consulting with a career service who will remain nameless, but they became indoctrinated by their manager into this kind of no failure culture. And so you couldn't talk about failure, you couldn't talk about difficulties, you can only talk about solutions. And so when I came in, I spent the entire time talking about all the things I had done wrong in my guidance practice, and a big list of my biggest mistakes, because I wanted to set the example of saying, look, talking about failure is vital to learning. So a question that's coming, can this only be taught in small groups? I don't think that's true. I think it can help to have sort of smaller, more interesting, because it is a kind of personalized thing. But actually, reflection can be a group activity, because actually what you need is some kind of comparison. But certainly it would need to be a safe space, as you said, Michelle. So I'm going to close there. I've got some other kinds of things in the slides which talk about kind of backgrounds in terms of thinking about how the brain works, which I won't go through, and also kind of understanding the elements and components of reflection, looking at kind of the sort of how do you build in your learning design that kind of emotional support. but also kind of different roles that AI might play within a kind of reflective process. But there's kind of lots of stuff that you can actually read. But I'm going to draw that to a close now because we're going to move into the breakout rooms again. So I will stop sharing that. I'll remind you of those three questions if you want to. One is what's the biggest impact that's had on your development? How do you incorporate reflection into your own kind of professional development? And what are the biggest challenges that you or others face within that? That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Lots to think about there. So we've heard from Bob about that higher education specific set of perspectives about the needs of career development professionals. We've heard about CPD and reflection. Time now to go back into breakout rooms. I'll create the same rooms, but I know that a few people have had to leave, so we'll think about, I'll have a look at whether I need to do some rejigging. Brilliant. Well, we've covered a lot of ground from signature pedagogies, research into professional training, contexts, and Funboy 3, and through to AI. This is an opportunity now to sort of tease out what reflections we've got from the afternoon. Would anyone, any particular room, like to begin by sharing their thoughts? Before I pick on someone.
I'll say something for our group.
Thanks, Janet.
So hang on, who were we? We were Pete, Bob, Harrietta, and
Keith.
And Keith, indeed. Yeah. So we spent some time talking about our friend AI. We were a bit ambivalent about whether or not we could incorporate it specifically in reflective practice. So that was a matter of some debate. And we were also considering reflective practice as whether or not it was integral to career development practice. And if so, what the challenges were of teaching reflective practice. That was sort of two of the areas that they're in my mind. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add any additional thoughts from our group.
Did you come to any conclusions about those questions?
It was still quite controversial. We were talking about different relationships with AI and whether the kind of positive approach or whether a more, I think Keith pointed us in the direction of Socratic AI, which was a new one on me, that there are ways of not necessarily having a best friend called AI, but there might be a version of AI which would be more helpful in interrogating what's going on rather than agreeing with everything. That seemed a better fit than please tell me what was going on in that coaching session that I didn't understand.
Yeah, and absolutely, there is the potential to use AI that way, and it's possible to use AI as a kind of Socratic partner, but it requires you to know how to prompt it to do that, because it's not necessarily sold and marketed as that, even though actually it's probably better at that than it is at providing concrete and accurate answers to questions.
Well, that's an interesting connection with an age-old debate about career development work, isn't it? The place of the concrete and definitive answer versus the help to think through the complexity of something. Yeah, a lot of us would recognise those tensions in our work with clients.
And could I just add one example of how this area is challenging? Just on the BBC today, there's an article about a graduate who, in the last 2 months after graduating, has applied for 500 jobs. and he's still unemployed. So you can just imagine the amount of time and effort and the use of AI in helping improve the application process, but at the same time has massively increased, as Bob was referencing from the ISE research, that essentially AI is responsible for the huge increase in volume, as described as vanilla applications that graduates think they can just get away with to get a job without reflecting, really.
More connections between us and our brains and the way what our clients are experiencing. I'm going to go to Hazel now, whose hand is up. Thank you, Hazel.
Just thought I'd volunteer. So we had a really interesting group chat. Just before I tell you what our group said, can I just tell you I've applied for something that's on Friday, and I've used AI, and actually it was fantastic, guys. It sped up that process for me massively. So controversially, I just put that out there because actually prompts helped me when at the end of the day when my brain was really tired, and I have got the interview. So I'll keep you posted about whether it worked or not. I just think we have to be careful, don't we? Because our clients are using this space. So I just thought, well, let's use this space and see how it goes. So I'll keep you posted. I also, so a phrase I wrote down from our group was something that David said to us, that we're preparing people to be learners. So if we buy into that in any part, then AI is something we're going to have to learn about ourselves and maybe tackle alongside our learners. So I'm on that journey with them. We're investing a huge amount here at Southampton University in sort of policing it and resisting it. And I'm personally not sure we'll ever hold back that tide. But again, we'll keep you posted. One of the things we talked about also was David's question, which was what impacts us most. And I thought, I hope Michelle doesn't mind me sharing, not the specifics, but she mentioned a person had been kind of had the most impact upon her. And I thought that was really important because it's easy to think about courses that maybe impact us or events, but that really called out to me. So those people, those mentors, those people that have modelled practice, how important they are, and how in this sort of distance learning, distance working world, those people make such a difference and how we connect with them. So that's the anti-AI argument in many ways. So we covered a fair amount of ground. My colleagues, David, Michelle, and Joe, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, it was just nice to have time to have a chat between ourselves on a very important topic of reflection and learning. So thank you.
Thanks. Any other thoughts been prompted by that? Wendy.
I thought I would just, in an act of kindness to the people in my group, save them the embarrassment of doing this job. So I was with Robin and Sue and Oliver in that conversation, and we really did focus quite strongly on reflective practice, on the teaching of it, where we only really scratched the surface and thought about the way that courses could build it in. We had a lovely example from Sue, and one of Sue's ex-pupils, students, as I understood. So that was really nice, having a bit of reflection in our room between on experience on a course. But we really focused mostly on how you sustain reflective practice in the settings in which many guidance practitioners are working, career development practitioners. And we did have a number of models. We had a model of action learning sets. We talked quite a bit about formal supervision, which Oliver had experienced quite a bit. We talked about mentoring. And I think we were starting to develop a sort of menu of different mechanisms that could be used within the profession that could support reflective practice even in quite busy, quite stressful settings, and we were just starting to talk about, you know, whether there are sort of triggers that would sort of bring it to the surface and get some happening if it was getting weak again. And we were thinking about how it's linked with professional registration, for example. I know it is in many professions, but in other settings I've seen it linked to the simple monthly one-to-one. You know, the one-to-one is a chance to reflect. A team meeting is a chance to reflect. You know, I know all those things get squeezed out, but we have to think about the minimal triggers in our environments. I think people don't want to do it. It's just that it gets lost somewhere along the way. Group, was that fair? Do chip in.
Yeah. No, I think that was fair, and I think we were also starting to think about those people who don't have the luxury of a team, because I think that was something that Robin brought up, wasn't it? That there's a it's a different situation for somebody who's working within a team than working as a sole practitioner. So yeah, thanks, Wendy.
Yeah,
that's and you made some really helpful connections across the inputs this afternoon, because we, thinking about CPD requirements and how and expectations, and how that's part of the professionalizing piece through to the how we do it. Interestingly, the thought that was triggered for me, Wendy, and what you said was that in my literature reviewing around signature pedagogies, I saw supervision described as a signature pedagogy within psychotherapy education. And we've had lots of discussion, haven't we, about its potential within our space, and how it could be used. I'm really interested in thinking about, well, if we're borrowing from psychotherapy, are we continuing to focus on the one-to-one work, or perhaps we frame and develop supervisory models that also link to the organizational, the contextual, the systemic stuff that both Bob and I were talking about as being really key areas of competence.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that you can use AI for, in terms of kind of feeding in a perspective and then getting it to kind of ask you questions from that perspective to help you reflect in the way that a supervisor might.
Yeah. Janet has a hand up.
Yeah, I would argue, I think quite strongly, that it's even more or most important for there to be supervision when career professionals are working in organisational systems. I think it's a risk. It's quite a significant risk to both the practitioner and to the quality of the consultation or the intervention if what's ever going on in the system is not attended to, because that's likely to be played out within the consulting organisation or the career agency or whoever. I mean, that's the almost inevitable state of affairs, that the system will work its way into the individual practitioner or into the consulting group. So for those reasons, it's risky not to be operating as a reflective practice group or to have external supervision in an organisational structure. I'd argue.
And the external supervision brings a different dimension to that, in terms of allowing you to step out of particular communities.
Yeah, because unless somebody is outside of the boundary of the system, it's not possible to actually be entirely clear about what the impact of the system is on the practitioners. Yeah.
I'm getting a very thoughtful vibe from you all.
Emma's raised her hand.
Sorry?
Emma's raised her hand.
Emma, sorry, I didn't see that. Thanks, David.
That's right. I was just going to do a bit of feedback from our group, but I don't know whether Rose or Anne wanted to say anything. But it felt like a lot of the things you were saying, Wendy, really resonated with what we were talking about. So we were talking about that sort of needing those sort of supportive systems or processes to encourage reflection, I think. And we're also talking about how it can be quite difficult if you're in sort of isolated places, if you're perhaps working in a school and you have less of a sort of peer or network to do that with. And we're also talking about the importance of time and space to actually be able to reflect. And sometimes it can feel a bit indulgent when you're sort of fighting fires, and that having that space for you and to spend time on you can feel like you have to give that time to somebody else. So about being able to hold that boundary, to have that time and space. So I don't know whether was Anne, if there was anything else you wanted to add, if I've reflected it correctly.
Thank you. And we've had a comment in the chat from Michelle taking us back into the thinking about the professional development, the qualifications side of the content that we've covered this afternoon, that noting that in this week's bonfire of the apprenticeships, in which it was announced that a number of different apprenticeship standards aren't going to be used in future. At least the level 6 career development professional apprenticeship is not at risk at the moment. The coaching apprenticeship has gone. I'm not sure what conclusion we can draw from that, Michelle, but I am mightily relieved. I guess thinking back to what you were saying there, Emma, I'm wondering what we can put in place, what can help the lone practitioner to engage in that reflective process. We know it's a problem. We talk about it being a problem. What can we do about it?
Ros,
hi.
Hi, I was just thinking, I don't know if this is possible, but after you qualify, you should be somehow forced by the CDI to engage, to have a mentor who's more experienced than you and to engage in kind of monthly conversations with you. And then after that, you could have your qualification signed off in a different way, something to force us into it.
We used to have the probationary year when I were a lad.
There you go.
You only had to do it for a year, Bob.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Oliver's raised his hand, as I fully expected he might. Thank you, Ros.
Well, Ros said what I was going to say. I mean, ideally, I think I'd like one day for professional registration to have mandatory supervision, monthly or whatever we deem appropriate as a condition of registration alongside the 25 hours CPD. Hold this under your hats, folks, but I'm tentatively looking into something. I've mooted the idea internally in the CDO of some kind of post-qualifying training. I'd love a certificate in supervision, just like psychotherapists and other professions have. I'd like that. That would probably have to come first, so that we've got some trained up supervisors, and they would have to build a business, and there'd have to be capacity, I think. But I think this is an area where the CDI can really, really help. And also, I think we would need to talk to the places where careers advisors work. So, whether that's education or whatever context, to help them see the added value in terms of quality if your professional is being regularly supervised. And that's just, better practitioner, but also it's a further level of safeguard, really.
I was going to quickly chip in at that point and say my concern about that, the idea of mandating reflection, is that you then run the risk of what you get is performative reflection. You get the box ticking type of reflection and in some ways, I maybe we should be spending more of our time thinking about how do we get people to be enthusiastic about reflective practice? How do you get them to actually want to do it? And I guess it comes back down to things like the self-efficacy, the valuing of the process and seeing what it does for you, and the kind of, helping people to see the outcomes, but also giving them the variety. One of the things that I tried to aim for with Guidance Skills Advanced was to say, I'm going to introduce you to so many different ways that you can reflect, that one of them will work for you. And I don't care which one it is, but I'm going to throw all of them at you and see which one sticks. And that was part of that thing, is to say there isn't one way of doing it. You've got to find a way that does it for you, and that you will actually enjoy using.
Agreed. I don't disagree. I think you could have both. You could sell it, and you could have a sort of a minimum expectation. I think there's always a risk of it being performative. I don't think that's completely obviated. I'm just thinking about the people out there, particularly trying to scratch a living in schools in England, who don't have a lot of money, and we can make it sound like the nicest thing to have possible. If it's a nice thing to have and it's not essential, they may or may not do it. That's all. Sorry, Roz has got a hand up.
Oh yeah,
I'm going to take Roz, and then I'm going to wrap up for us, because
I'm just going to say, working in a school is very difficult to carve out any time. But if I could say to my manager, I won't, you've paid for this course, but I won't get accreditation unless I get an hour off a month, then that's a win-win. It's not that I don't want to do it, and I think everybody does want to do it, but we are not given time to do it. And that would be a way of forcing institutions and organizations to ensure that you have that time to do it, because it will improve practice, and definitely for safeguarding as well. I think it's really important. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering whether we can connect the lone practitioner in there and talk and develop models of reflection where career development practitioners are reflecting with other professionals, and that might also develop our confidence in talking positively and communicating clearly what we actually do and what our work is. So potentially virtuous circle there. It's been a really interesting afternoon. Thank you so much for being here to the bitter end. Thank you to our speakers. Hannah's had to go, but thank you, David and Bob. Thank you, Emma, for the organisation, and others for being here and being taking part in the breakout rooms as well. You'll get an evaluation in due course. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much.
Can we quickly trail our next session?
Yes, I'm sorry, Emma, go for it.
So our next session is on the 19th of May, and it will be facilitated and presented by our lovely Wendy Hirsch, and that's Reflections on Careers, and that's 5 till 6:30. So I think you'll get a notification about it, and all bookings are open. So have a look and book on.
Brilliant.
Super. Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody.